Today we are going to be discussing the events that led up to the Revolutionary War. Last night in your textbooks you should have read the chapter over these events, so you have a little bit of background knowledge about them. Okay, so since we already know a little bit, we are going to fill out a KWL chart. Okay, how many of you know what these are about?
I do not.
You do not. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, I will explain it to you and kind of walk you through it. Okay, so first step of the KWL chart, over on the left side you're going to write a K. Okay, and in that column you're going to write what you already know about the topic. Okay, and so then in the next chart, or the next column, you put a W, and that's what you want to know. So maybe you know like the name of an event but you don't know what it's about, or you've heard about it and you think it might be part of it. Put that in your want to know, and we will discuss it further later throughout lecture or in our video. Okay? And so then in the last column, you're going to put an L. And then after we go through the whole lesson, we'll discuss and kind of review what we learned throughout it. And that is what we'll put in that column, but that won't be until later. Okay, so the first step of filling out this chart, write down everything that you already know. Okay, so I'll give you a minute to do that. Alright, so now that we've written that down, what are some things that we already know?
The Boston Tea Party.
Okay, so we know about the Boston Tea Party. Okay, what else are some things that we know? We have the Stamp Act. Okay, something else. Also have the Currency Act. Alright, so there's a couple things that none of you mentioned that we will go over that were in our textbooks, or it'll be discussed in our video. Okay, so one of those is going to be the Sugar Act, so write that in your want to know. And so we'll learn about the Sugar Act and how it was not just a tax placed on sugar, it was more about controlling the colonies. All of their exports had to go through Britain, which cost the colonies more money and put more control on them through the British, which the whole point of, the colonists coming to America was for freedom. Religious freedom, but freedom in a whole as well. Okay, so another one we didn't mention is going to be the Quartering Act. So write that down. Okay, so in the video and throughout the rest of this lesson, we'll talk about that and how British made it a law that, the colonists had to house the British military in their houses, even though they were against the military. Okay, so now that we have some things in the want to know column, or now that we have this filled out a little bit, so those of you that don't have any of these in your know column, write those over in the want to know. And then also, if there's anything that you have written in your know column that you can't give me, 5, 7 sentences about, go ahead and move that over in your want to know. And we'll discuss that further and you'll learn about it throughout the video. Okay, then throughout the lesson, or after the lesson, we will go over what we learned and we'll fill out that final column. Alright, so now we are going to watch a video, kind of help give you more information about the events leading up to the war and let that kind of sink in a little bit. Okay? Now that we have our chart filled out, we're going to watch a video and you guys can take notes over that. Go ahead and focus more on what you wrote in your want to know column. That way you're picking up on it more, getting more information, and it'll help you fill out our worksheets later. Okay? If you look on there, you're going to see each event is labeled, and then there's lines next to each event for you to write down. I want you to give me at least one paragraph about each event on there. Just kind of write whatever you know, but yes, at least one paragraph. For those of you that get done early, go ahead and kind of help out your neighbors if there's something, if you see someone struggling with something or they left something blank, help them out, especially if you know a lot about that topic. Just kind of let them know. Sometimes it helps for people to learn it from their peers rather than from me. You guys can explain it in a language that you understand more. If there's one that you're really struggling with, don't feel afraid to ask your neighbor. They can help you. Maybe they were just paying attention more during that part of the video, so don't be afraid to ask for help. And then if there's one that none of you are really picking up on, we'll go over those at the end, and I'll kind of talk about it more, and we'll get those all filled out. So I'll give you time to do that. So now that we have the worksheets filled out in most of our KWL chart, we can fully identify the different events that led up to the Revolutionary War. Okay, so we'll go ahead and fill out the L column of our chart over what we learned. So what are some things that we learned?
The Currency Act.
Currency Act. Okay, so in this act, we can all fully identify that, this was an act, or taxes placed on, not taxes, this was an act placed on the colonials' currency. They couldn't use their paper money or their coins anymore that they passed among the states. They had to use the British money, which meant, less money for them, and it was controlled more. Okay, so another act we talked about, Stamp Act. Okay, and so we can identify that this was an act placed, or it was taxes placed on any sort of paper that went through the colonies. So, playing cards, just loose leaf paper, packaging for food, mail, any sort of paper that went through the colonies, they had to pay taxes on, which gets a little expensive and tedious. So another one we went over.
What about toilet paper?
Toilet paper, yes, would be taxed. Every sort of paper would be taxed. Okay, so another one we went over, we talked about earlier, the Quartering Act. Okay, and so this was, stated that the colonists had to allow British military to stay in their home, even though they weren't in a war yet, but they had these tensions going on, and there were, there was a lot of conflict, and a lot of people didn't want these military people in their country, let alone in their homes. And so the British were trying to pass this law that made them have to allow these people in their homes, and so that caused a lot of conflict. Another one was the Townshend Act, which we talked about. This was just a tax placed on things like glass, paint, lead, all of that would be coming into the colonies from Britain as well as other places in the world. And then we have the Sugar Act as well. So in that one you need to identify that it wasn't just a tax placed on sugar, it was on exports as a whole. So anything that came out of the United States, any sort of product like lumber, furs, anything.
Does it have to be food?
No, lumber and furs aren't necessarily food, but any sort of export, like anything, had to go.
Why are they called the Sugar Act?
Because it was also on sugar. That was one of the main ones that they exported at the time, and so that was a big one. But anything that came out of the United States had to go through Britain first before it could go to any other country. They weren't allowed to export straight to another country. And so that made it a lot more expensive going through Britain, when a lot of countries it was closer just to go straight to them. But, and it also was about control. The British felt that they were losing control over the United States, or I guess the colonies. And so they wanted their exports to go through them first. But the colonists came to America for that freedom. They didn't want to be controlled by Britain, and so this was kind of a step backwards for them. Or that's how they saw it. And so then we also had the Tea Act, which was obviously a tax on tea. We know that.
On just tea or?
Just tea. And then, but that led to one of the main things that everyone thinks about with the Revolutionary War. That's the Boston Tea Party. And so with that, you need to be able to talk about that in a full paragraph. Tell me, colonists got together, dressed up as Indians so that the British wouldn't know that it was them. They snuck onto British ships and dumped the crates of tea over into the Boston Harbor. And so, the British lost all of that money in that tea because colonists weren't buying it because they didn't want to pay the tax on it. And it was just dumped into the harbor. And then the last one that we talked about was the Boston Massacre. And that is one, tell me, that wasn't technically a part of the Revolutionary War, but that is one that people consider kind of starting the war. And so that's when British military people shot and killed 5 colonists. And that really kind of got the rest of the colonists that weren't fully prepared for war. That kind of pushed them over the edge and made them want to start the Revolutionary War. Right? And so after this lesson, you should all be prepared enough to be able to write at least one paragraph over each of these topics. And I think you fully are looking at your charts as well as your handouts.